I was getting older, and Mira barely recognized me anymore. I ordered every beautician in the kingdom to my palace and underwent every beauty regimen possible for years and years to preserve the little youth I had left. Word of my new activities got out, and the kingdom criticized me, saying I was vain and obsessed with beauty. As I got older, so did Snow White. She became more and more beautiful every day. She longed to find some motherly companionship in me, but I had none to give. She used to sneak into my chambers and watch me undergo preservation treatments for hours. One day, Snow White snuck into my chambers while I was away and discovered Mira in the mirror. She looked very similar to myself when I was her age, and Mira believed she was me. For months and months, Snow White was all he could talk about. My queen is fair to see, but Snow White is far fairer than thee, he would say. He had a new face and name to give all the love he felt for me. I wanted her dead. I ordered my huntsman to take her into the woods and kill her. She escaped, but I tried again and again to kill her myself. I was convinced Mara would come back to me once she was dead, but it was too late. Mara was gone. He had faded into what he has become today. My entire life has been spent trying to recover something that was taken from me so many years ago. However, I'll never be martyred for life. I'll be forever known as the vain queen who tried to kill the poor innocent and helpless Princess Snow White, and nothing more. The evil queen said, but who wouldn't have gone to the ends of the earth to be reunited with the person they loved more than life itself? Who wouldn't have ripped their own heart out to stop that kind of pain? Alex couldn't stop the tears rolling down her face. There were so many times after the loss of her dad when she wished all the pain would go away. She may have turned her own heart into stone if she'd had the option. She couldn't help but see herself in the evil queen, and it was unsettling. I've done many terrible things in my time, but many terrible things have been done to me over time as well, the evil queen said. So far as I'm concerned, the world and I are even. But it wasn't you, Alex said. You weren't thinking clearly. If you had your heart, you wouldn't have done all those horrible things to all those people. You're still Evely. Think about how differently people would feel about you if they knew this, Connor said. The world will always choose convenience over reality, the evil queen said. It's easier to hate, blame, and fear than it is to understand. No one wants the truth. They want entertainment. The evil queen turned back to the twins and saw the tears running down Alex's face. She walked over to Alex and let one of the tears roll onto her finger. The evil queen stared down at the tear, just as she had done to the vial of fairy tears. A sentimental story always gets the same reaction out of girls like you, the evil queen said. She flicked Alex's tear onto the table with the wishing spell items. Suddenly, all the items began to glow, and a golden light began swirling above them. The evil queen had activated the wishing spell. Chapter 21, The Mirror. What? Alex said. Her head was throbbing from being so confused. This doesn't make any sense. It needed a fairy's tear. We can't let this happen, Connor screamed. We have to stop her. She can't use the wishing spell. The twins struggled and fought against the ropes, but there was nothing they could do. It was too late. The light rose off the wishing spell items and began to circle around the evil queen. No! Connor screamed. Please don't, Alex yelled. The evil queen took a deep breath. Wishing spell. I wish to free the man in the mirror, she said. The light shot toward the mirror like a lightning. The whole mirror was consumed in the light for a few moments before it faded. The glass melted away like ice on a warm day. The mirror looked like a doorway into a very dark room. The twins waited with anticipation. The evil queen walked over to the mirror, keeping a cautious distance from it, but nothing happened. She got closer to the mirror, so close that the twins wondered if she was going to climb into it. "Mira?" the evil queen asked. Suddenly a man fell out of the mirror and onto the floor. His eyes were closed and he was breathing very heavily. He was pale and seemed paralyzed. It was as if he had just awoken from a coma. The man was the plainest person the twins had ever seen. He had no distinctive characteristics whatsoever. He had spent so much reflecting reflecting others that he had lost himself completely. "Where am I?" the man said between deep breaths. He had enough energy to keep one eye open at a time, but not both. The evil queen picked up her heart of stone, and the twins could see the change in her face as her body was reunited with its soul. She was a different person. She was a person. "Mira, it's me. It's Evely. You're free," the evil queen said. Her voice was different while she held the stone. She spoke softly with love and affection. Tears poured down her face. The twins could see the reflection of the evil queen and the man in the mirror of truth. The reflections weren't those of the pale man and hooded woman who were actually in the room with them. They were of two young people. One was a beautiful girl, the evil queen had once been, and the other a very handsome young man that Mira must have been before being imprisoned in the mirror. Evely cradled Mira in her arms and slowly rocked him. "You're free, Mira. You're free," she repeated softly. "I freed you just like I promised. I'm sorry it took me as long as it did." The man opened both his eyes and stared up at her. She had only freed the very little of him that was left. The rest had faded away a long time ago. "Evely," he said, and a slight smile appeared on his face, recognizing the name. The smile lasted only a moment. His eyes fluttered shut, and he stopped breathing. "Mira?" the evil queen asked. "Mira!" Mira didn't move. He was as lifeless as he looked. His reflection disappeared entirely from the golden mirror. "No!" the evil queen said. "No!" The tears were coming back, were running down much faster. "Come back! Please come back!" Alex and Connor became emotional at the sight of it. The evil queen had held the body of the man from her mirror in a tight embrace. She sobbed into him, still holding on to the heart of stone. She had worked her entire life for this, but she was too late. The wolves were starting to become impatient outside the castle. Many were pacing back and forth across the drawbridge. Others were lying across the entrance corridor, and one was sharpening his teeth with Goldilocks' sword. They had been waiting long enough for the evil queen, and they growled and grunted with restlessness. Suddenly Malumclaw's ears perked up, and he looked to the horizon. The ground was vibrating as something large was traveling their way. "What is that?" he asked. A cavalcade of soldiers stampeded toward the castle at full speed. The soldiers were dressed in silver and green armor and came from the northern kingdom. They were led by Froggy and Sir Grant, sharing a horse. Jack was riding Porridge beside him. All the wolves jumped up. "All right, boys, we're done waiting for the queen," Malumclaw said. "We're going inside to get Red Riding Hood, and then we're getting out of here." All the wolves obediently howled, and they ran into the castle. One of them pulled a lever with his mouth, raising the drawbridge. The soldiers assembled on the edge of the moat. "The evil queen is in there," Froggy said to Sir Grant. "The wolves are working for her. They took my friends." "Evil queen," Sir Grant called out with his booming voice. "This is Sir Grant of Her Majesty Queen Snow White's Royal Guard. You have 30 seconds to surrender or we will open fire on the castle." The soldiers aligned a row of cannons. Jack hopped off Porridge and found Goldilocks' sword on the ground. She was in there. Prepare the cannons," Sir Grant ordered, and his soldiers positioned the cannons facing the castle. "Fire!" A cannon blasted the raised drawbridge into pieces. The entire castle rattled from the hit. "Prepare to fire again," Sir Grant ordered. "Hold your fire," Jack yelled. "There are innocent people in that castle. You mustn't fire until we can safely get them out of there. I have reason to believe Queen Red Riding Hood may be inside." Grant looked fearful. He couldn't have the death of an innocent queen on his hands. "You have 10 minutes before we open fire," Grant told Jack. "Get in there and save as many people as you can." Jack nodded without hesitation. If the woman he loved was in harm's way, nothing would stop him from saving her. "I'll go with you," Froggy said, secretly alarmed at his own bravery, which had suddenly swept over him. "You may need a hand." He and Froggy hopped onto Porridge. The horse took a few steps back and then charged toward the castle, jumping over the moat and through the large opening where the drawbridge had been a moment before. The castle's dungeon was small, but it had a row of several small cells. Goldilocks and Red Riding Hood's ropes had gags. Goldilocks and Red Riding Hood's ropes and gags had been removed, but they were each put in their own cell, mostly so Goldilocks wouldn't kill Red before the wolves had their chance. The huntsman and the huntress watched over them like father and daughter hawks. "I just don't understand why my army hasn't rescued me yet. Shouldn't that be their top priority?" Red whined. "If I were Cinderella, none of this would be happening. I outran your army because, like most things about your kingdom, they're slow," Goldilocks said. "Besides, they've probably already elected a new queen by now." "That's not funny," Red said. "This has been the worst day of my entire life. I didn't even know it was possible to be kidnapped twice in one day." The wolves stormed into the dungeon. Red went white with fear. "Soldiers are invading the castle," Malumclaw said. "We're not waiting for Evil Queen any longer. We're taking Red Riding Hood now." "Get the queen," the huntsman said to his daughter. The huntress nodded and ran down to the opposite side of the dungeon and up a small stone staircase. She looked back before climbing it, not sure if leaving her father alone was a good idea. "No," Red screamed. "You can't let them take me." She looked all over the dungeon, unsure who she was talking to. She didn't have any friends in here. "I'm ready for this day to be over." "Fine, you can take her," the huntsman said to the wolves. He unlocked her cell, and Red jumped up and pushed the door open, knocking the huntsman back into the wolves. She ran as fast as she could down the other side of the dungeon and up the stone staircase the huntress had climbed. "After her!" Malumclaw ordered, and he and his pack ran after the young queen. She managed to get a head start as the wolves had trouble fitting into the staircase. Moments later, Jack and Froggy emerged into the dungeon. Jack was wielding Goldilocks' sword. "Stand back!" Jack yelled at the huntsman, who backed into a corner with his hands. "Jack," Goldilocks said, clutching the bars of her cell, "what are you doing here?" "Porridge found me," Jack said. "I knew something must be wrong, because you weren't with her. She led me here, and I met up with Snow White's army on the way." They stared at each other so lovingly that it made Froggy uncomfortable. "Splendid. I'll find Queen Red Riding Hood and the twins while you reunite," he said, and hopped back in the direction they'd come from. The huntsman pulled a crossbow out from under his coat. "Jack, watch out!" Goldilocks screamed. The huntsman began shooting arrows at Jack. He ducked and dived, barely eluding them. Goldilocks had to dodge the arrows too. They were ricocheting off the stone walls in every direction. The huntsman moved like a machine, reloading his crossbow instantaneously each time he fired. Goldilocks picked up an arrow that had landed near her and began picking the lock of her cell with the arrowhead. Jack was trying to block the arrows with the sword. It was getting harder. The arrows were coming at him much faster. He hit one perfectly, and it flew behind the huntsman. The huntsman grunted and froze. His eyes bulged, and he fell flat on his face. The arrow had bounced off the wall behind him and was now sticking out of his back. The huntsman was dead. "Jack, behind you!" Goldilocks yelled. Jack turned around, and the huntress stabbed him in the arm with her dagger. She had seen the whole thing. "Ah!" Jack screamed. He dropped the sword and fell to the ground. He crawled across the floor and sat himself up against the wall. He was clutching his arm. Blood was everywhere. The huntress walked toward him with her dagger raised. She didn't speak, but she had pure rage in her eyes. As far as she was concerned, Jack had just killed her father. She swooped toward him for a fatal strike. Goldilocks blocked the dagger with her sword. She had picked the lock of her cell and repossessed her sword, just in time to save Jack's life. "I think it's time you and I had a little girl talk," Goldilocks said, and kicked the huntress in the stomach. The huntress rolled on the other side of the room and hopped back to her feet. Goldilocks and the huntress circled each other for a moment. They stared each other down, waiting for the others to make the first move. Goldilocks swung her sword at the huntress, and the duel began. The huntress only had a dagger half the size of Goldilocks' sword, but she used it well. Goldilocks had finally found her match. They moved all around the dungeon, each shielding offensive strikes from the other. The huntress cornered Goldilocks. Goldilocks ran up the wall and flipped over the huntress, cornering her now. "Where did you learn to do that?" Jack asked. "I'll tell you later," Goldilocks said. The huntress headbutted Goldilocks and ran out of the dungeon. "Come back here," Goldilocks called out and chased after her. They continued their fight throughout the castle, climbing higher and higher as they went. Meanwhile, Red Riding Hood was being chased through the castle by the big bad wolf pack. She was running for her life, and tears were streaming down her face. She had only been this scared once before, an infamous day when she'd visited her grandmother as a child. Red wasn't crying from fear alone, though. She was also upset that she was getting one of her favorite dresses ruined. Red also wished she had chosen better shoes that were equipped for running when she dressed herself earlier that day. She reached one of the highest levels of the castle. Areas of the floor had rotted away, and she had to be very careful not to fall through any of the large holes that would drop her several stories below. The wolves behind her were not being so cautious. They had a hard time getting traction on the smooth wooden floor and kept slipping into the holes, howling as they fell to their deaths. Red ran up a wooden staircase. The upper half of the staircase crumbled away in front of her as she passed the landing. "That's not good," Red said. She looked back at the steps behind her and saw Malumclaw. She was trapped. The wolf made his way toward her, one step at a time, enjoying the aggravation he caused her. "I've waited for this moment for over a decade," Malumclaw growled. "Oh my, what big claws you have," Red said, trembling. "The better to maul you with, my dear," Malumclaw said. Red had never expected to die like this. She had always imagined it would be back in her castle with dozens of her and Jack's children by her bedside. "Oh my, what big teeth you have," Red said. "The better to bite you with, my dear," Malumclaw said. He was just a few feet away. He arched his back, ready to pounce. Suddenly, a quiet whistling sound came from outside the castle. A cannonball crashed through the wall and directly into Malumclaw. The stairs collapsed, and the wolf was knocked into the next room. If he had survived it, he wouldn't be in one piece. "Oh my," Red said. She grasped on the banister of the stair landing as if her life depended on it. The steps on either side of her were gone. She was truly stuck now. The landing started to teeter. The wood below it was slowly starting to crumble. "Oh my," Red screamed. The banister collapsed and Red fell. She screamed the entire way down. Just a few seconds before Red was about to hit the floor, Froggy jumped into the air and caught the young queen. They both landed safely, courtesy of his strong frog legs. "You saved my life," Red said with big thankful eyes. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced, Your Majesty," Froggy said. "My name is—" Froggy never got to finish. Red was repeatedly kissing his cheek. He turned dark green. Who knew a frog could blush? The castle began to shake as more cannons were fired. They've started the attack, Froggy said. We have to find Connor and Alex and get out of here.